Shall we play a game?
So the one that shocks me is only 25% report challenges around securing cloud resources. I swear it's 100%.
Good afternoon and welcome back to another episode of Blue Square Security. This will be our final episode of 2023 as we prepare for the holidays. Today we're joined by Drew Nichols, who is a global black belt. This conversation takes us all the way from discussions around the Microsoft DART team or detection and response team. We talk about some known threat actors like Scattered Spider or Lemon Duck. And then also talking about some known threats that have made some major impact, like Log4j and NotPetya. But it's really around cloud security and his role and how a GBB might be able to help your organization as you continue your journey to the cloud. So thanks so much for joining us. We thank you for joining us throughout 2023. We've got some cool guests lined up for 2024. So hopefully you'll join us for those episodes as well. Thanks so much. All right, thank you again for joining us for another episode of Blue Square Security. We're joined today by Drew Nichols, who's a global black belt in cloud security. The intention of today's conversation is really to talk about the world of cloud and the world of security and the expertise that Drew brings to the table. So Drew, if you would just give us a quick intro of who you are, your role, maybe explain to somebody that doesn't know what a GBB is, what that actually entails, and a little bit of your background. I know you're a Microsoft vet.
Cool. Thank you so much, Greg. Yeah, so Drew Nichols, been at Microsoft going on about 9 years now. I started as part of what's called MCS, Microsoft's consulting services back in 2015. At the time, we were helping customers migrate to Azure with security and governance in mind. I did that for about 2.5 years, helping several large organizations do things like how do we do RBAC properly? How do we do logging properly? How do we get the telemetry that we need from the cloud? Because back then it was so brand new that a lot of organizations were kind of struggling to even understand the security controls around it. In 2017, we started, unfortunately, seeing a lot of adversarial groups attacking our cloud infrastructures, customers' cloud environments. So I joined a team called DART, which is our detection and response team, or our customer-facing incident response team, helping customers recover from those significant emotional events. What we realized is they're typically done from things like cloud misconfigurations, identity compromises, and did that for about 2.5 years, and I loved it. It was one of those roles that you really got to have a lot of empathy for customers, right? Because it's like some of these customers are going through some of the worst experiences that they will as a company. Did it right before COVID actually happened. I took a different role. I took this kind of role. So as a GBB or a global black belt, we're really focused on helping organizations from an architectural kind of an end-to-end. It's really neat because I get to work closely with our different team members from engineering, from marketing, from field. So my role is I'm the lead for our CNAPP strategy, so Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. I really focus more on kind of the container security, the DevSecOps, the data security posture management, but love server protection. And overall, though, kind of my, I guess, security hobby, right, is if you start looking at the NIST cybersecurity framework, I'm a huge advocate of the identify and protect stages. So I'm huge in kind of the posture management world.
Gotcha. And you reside in the Tennessee area, is that right?
Nashville, Tennessee, yes, sir.
All right, good stuff. So I'm going to start by sharing just a quick deck here and pop up one of the stats, and just wanted to get your thoughts on this. This came from just basically a Google search and looking for some cloud data around security, and it came from a site called Expert Insights. Let me just read to you. 45% of the breaches are cloud-based. According to a recent survey, 80% of companies have experienced at least one cloud security incident in the last year, and 27% of organizations have experienced a public cloud security incident. And that's up from last year, about 10%. When we start looking at breaches from kind of a 35,000 foot view, and you can see that almost half of them are cloud-centric. Couple that with the fact that people's journey to the cloud is accelerating exponentially as we sit here in 2023 and almost into 24. I think with COVID, there's probably an asterisk there because I think there was a huge uptick, and we've covered that in previous episodes, the number of breaches that came up. But then it comes back and it says that 27% of organizations have experienced a public cloud security incident. When you are talking with customers about how to best approach their cloud security, do these types of stats come up? Is it almost that 50% mark where half of them have already experienced an incident? When you see this stat, does that ring true? Does that shock you? Does that seem unlikely for Microsoft customers? What are your thoughts just on this kind of high level stat here?
Oh, it's absolutely. No doubt, that's very close. I mean, if you even look at like something like IBM's cost of a data breach, right? They've actually found that cloud misconfigurations is now the third leading cause of a data breach. If you look at it from the perspective of the two things even before, identity compromises and phishing. So of the top three categories for a data breach, I mean, identity compromise, if I compromise your identity, if it's as like an Azure AD account, now I'm accessing your SaaS environment, or potentially like if you're an Azure admin or something like that, now I'm accessing your IaaS and PaaS environments. And then just cloud misconfigurations being the third leading cause of a data breach. So yeah, absolutely. I talk to customers a lot about this. And there's different reasons, right? So, I mean, if we rewind back to 2017, 2018, unfortunately, identity compromises, like most organizations, were very much ramping up on MFA. But now we started seeing like some of the like Scattered Spider or Octotempest doing things like AITM attacks or adversary in the middle attacks, where historically maybe an organization wouldn't have an MFA. Now they've moved into kind of an authenticator app or a text message. And that's where things like adversary in the middle attacks are so scary, because the adversaries are not getting just your username and password, but now they're getting your second authentication. Then we look at other ones like like Lemon Duck, who does nothing but scans for 22. So a lot of the adversary groups are looking for identity compromises and cloud misconfigurations, and it's just different roles. We have different ways, and unfortunately, from a security standpoint, we are not always we don't always know what we have out there. Things can get built very fast, which from a business perspective and an innovation perspective is incredible. But if I start having, a virtual machine or a storage account that's publicly exposed, and it might be a dev environment, but I'm using production data, that production data is at risk. So there's all of these scenarios that the cloud has been one of the most incredible things from an innovation standpoint. But from a security standpoint, there's a lot of new things and just different ways of doing stuff.
That brings up an interesting question around dev and DevOps, and the buzzword of moving at the speed of DevOps comes to mind. When you're talking with developers, and I would assume, and this is me making an assumption, I'm assuming they're really more deadline focused. They're, put product out, put enhancements out, make it GA as fast as possible. Is there a lack of training that comes to mind from an end user standpoint when we start looking at the DevOps departments? Because the speed of DevOps, phrase, or however you want to categorize that, speed is good when it's got parameters around it. But when we're talking about somebody's public cloud or even, other components of their environment, speed seems dangerous to me, and it seems careless to me. But a lot of these folks don't live and breathe in the world of security, and maybe they just don't know. Do you think that's a lack of training, or do you think that's just the way business moves? It's kind of a loaded question.
It's a great question. So I actually love DevOps, right? Like I love because what we're doing is at the end of the day, I love security, but what security does is it enables us as a company to do what's most important. And what's most important for us as a company is to provide our customers with their needs. To me, DevOps is all around getting your customer requirements filled faster. So to your point, like as the developer, my job is to do X. I need to go from pre-commit, commit, build, production as quickly as possible. Now, to your point as well, from the security side, that makes things harder. There is absolutely always can be more training. I think training will be one of the most important things. I'm a huge advocate of DevSecOps. One of the key pillars from a pre-commit stage before you ever do anything is to do true threat modeling. I talked to a lot of organizations about threat modeling, and a lot of organizations would love to be able to do a little bit more focus on it, actually looking at the application, like what's it going to do? What are things like, is there a database that could be susceptible to a SQL injection or things like that? Like really looking at the application before any piece of code is ever developed to think about what could go wrong. But we've gotten some really cool tools out there, whether it's like secret scanning. Secret scanning is a huge piece of my role. I talk to customers probably on a daily basis about it. But if you think about it, if I check in a piece of code to a repository that has like a SQL string in it or let's say infrastructure's code is a perfect example. If I'm using infrastructure's code and I'm building a virtual machine, it's got like the username and password like hard coded in there. If somebody branches off and pulls that repo, now they have a copy of your infrastructure code template and it's just like got hard coded username and passwords in it. So adversaries, if they can get access to your SCM or your source code management, they can go through these and find them. Same thing with like storage accounts. And so we've got really neat tools out there. Microsoft does, but there are other vendors as well. But that what it'll do is it'll allow you to like what's called push protection. It'll block even the check-in before it ever even kind of gets to that commit stage. So you're really reducing risk. Because ideally what they would be doing is something like a key vault or a hashy vault, and then calling that versus actually hard coding those credentials in. And then you start thinking about things like log4j, right? So when the developers first pushed out the application that had Log4j doing the monitoring, we'll just say this was like November of 2021. So before the Log4j vulnerability ever came out, they could have put it through like a dependency scanner and would have said it's fine because at that time there wasn't a vulnerability. But then, fast forward on December, I think it was 10th, 2021, the vulnerability got exposed. Everybody in the world was trying to remediate it. So having not just that, like, how would you say it? The scans at the time of check-in, but really having a deeper knowledge of what the government's done released a lot in like the SBOM world, so the software bill of materials, because you really need to know what your applications are using. And so when we start talking about DevSecOps, there's a lot of really neat tools out there. It's just tools a lot of organizations just haven't used before.
So when you start talking about Log4j and we talk about kind of the global footprint that incident really kind of created, I came from Checkpoint, so I had a little bit more of a network background, and my brain leans more towards like the 5th gen attacks that have a global impact. If we stay in the sense of just cloud security, and then we sprinkle in something like a NotPetya that also had kind of a global had a global footprint. Are there stats, or have you seen statistics or heard conversations about an increase of these 5th gen attacks that are polymorphic and affecting a global audience versus some of these attacks that we're talking about require very, very specific use cases and only affect maybe a certain vertical or a certain subset of users? I guess what my question is the 5th gen attacks, are they starting to hone in on cloud areas, or are those traditionally network based, or is that just an off base question altogether?
No, I think where you're trying to go is, or I think what you're asking me is really like, so when Log4j hit, if you look at what it was allowed, it would allow for remote execution. It would also allow you to like push the commands through, and it can go back to the end source of it. So pretty much every WAF provider in the world, Web Application Firewall, were like trying to go ahead and put the rules in there to block that from being injected into it. But then you have other ones that are much more focused on industries, and I'm not sure if that's where you were kind of going. Is like the difference
Yeah.
between, okay, yeah. So like you think about it, like if I'm an adversary and I can send out a script and just try to do it everywhere in the world. To me, kind of going back to like the polymorphic and talking about it like more holistically, if we look at oh, what was the name of it? It was when basically ransomware started. It was the SMB one back in like 2016, I think it was. But it wasn't like targeted attacks, right? It was literally just putting out the malware, looking to see where it could go, and it was very much put it out in the wild and see what happens. But
Kind
we
of a
kind of
spray and
moved.
pray approach.
Exactly, but now we like even from like the reverse engineering perspective, like we're seeing like hands-on keyboard ransomware. We might see variants that might be targeted to specific organizations, and those are a lot harder because we might have maybe the adversary has like a foothold in, and then we'll write the script based on. And to your point, like polymorphic, it is very concerning if we start moving into the world of AI. I know that there's been a lot of research that has shown, I believe it was called Black Mamba, was the one, yeah, that was done. That was the polymorphic malware. I haven't seen that today. I, from a Microsoft standpoint, I don't know if they've seen it. I guess fortunately, I'm not in that world anymore, so I'm not
Yeah.
doing like reverse engineering or anything of that nature. But hopefully, that at least kind of answered your question.
No, that's perfect. And yeah, we just had some training a couple days ago, and Black Mamba was part of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we're talking about this, I mean, I think you kind of mentioned this either when we first started or when we were just chatting. What are some of the pitfalls that you've seen or mistakes you've observed in cloud environments? And then kind of what are you doing at Microsoft? What's Microsoft doing, or what do you see out there that can address kind of those common security pitfalls that people are making?
So Azure policy, if I know this is a little bit different if we're talking about AWS and GCP, but from the Azure world, I recommend Azure policy. Like that's to me one of the most important things, foundational. And using Azure policy with some sort of framework, whether it's like NIST 800 171, whether it's ISO, whether it's CIS, really creating your environment based on some sort of framework. And also having kind of remediation. So one of the things that I will say I think a lot of organizations had this issue over the last 5 years is like a storage account that's publicly exposed to the internet that allows for public access. Like they'll put sensitive data in the storage account, and it's not even an adversary, they're like just going and grabbing a URL, and they can like grab all of the sensitive information just by hitting a URL. It was actually interesting. Limoneer Labs did a study that found 21% of publicly exposed S3 buckets contain sensitive information. So 1 out of 5 storage accounts holding sensitive data. So that's always kind of number one. Not using infrastructure as code. To me, infrastructure as code goes very closely with Azure policy. And it's because I want my deployment to be consistent. I want it to meet certain requirements. I want it to, whatever my t-shirt size is, right? My application A has a t-shirt size of medium. It needs to be consistent every single time. But if you're going to use infrastructure as code, which I highly recommend, actually do an infrastructure as code scanning, like check your templates before they ever get to production. Policy is great, but if I can look at it from the source code repository, scan my infrastructure as code template, I can see every potential vulnerability that's going to be there. I can just remediate it before it ever gets there. Is knowing where your sensitive data is. That is The cloud gives you the ability to spin up things very fast. It gives you the ability to, really be innovative. But for organizations that I've seen, they might have subscriptions or they might have resource groups that security is not, it's not in their purview. And developers will put like actual production data in there and goes back to the misconfigured storage accounts. So just knowing where your sensitive data is. Probably the biggest one is ensuring you have a remediation plan based on characteristics and variables. Like most organizations are going to have a lot of recommendations. That's just the nature of it. But how do you prioritize where to actually spend your time is, to me, the most important thing, because most studies show only about 10% of vulnerabilities get remediated. So let's make sure, if we're only able, and security teams are very overworked right now, where everyone knows like cybersecurity is understaffed right now. So I'm not going to sit here and say you should be able to knock out 100% of your vulnerabilities. That's just not feasible. And for my security friends out there, please note, I understand that. But if I can prioritize my remediation strategy and I'm knocking out the 10% that could most have the biggest impact, then at least I'm reducing my risk variable. I don't know, Michael, if that's what you're.
That's a good segue. Yeah, it's a good answer. And it's a good segue into the AI component of this conversation, when we know that we've got a security shortage as far as resources are concerned. We know that only 10% are getting addressed. That's, simple math leaves 90% being unaddressed. How do you view things like Security Copilot being leveraged from a SOC standpoint, either from a research and understanding the vulnerabilities, or pointing them in the right direction to take action, maybe on that 10+%?
So to me, like, Security Copilot's really about reducing time and allowing the team to really focus on their most important task, which is, detecting and protecting the organization. One of my favorite things, like when I was on Dart, I was actually just telling somebody about this the other day. So we would do a 5-day engagement, but the night before the last day, we had a readout, and that readout we had our out brief. I would usually stay up until like midnight that like night before, collecting all of my information, getting all of my my team members' findings, understanding it, putting it, and then creating the outbrief for the customer would take me hours. But something like a Security Copilot, where I can use it to create a PowerPoint that I can present to, whether it's my CISO, to my board of directors, that I can tell it to create the PowerPoint in a way that is creating it based on the targeted audience. It's going to reduce my time as a SOC analyst. And then, like you said, from the remediation standpoint, like really being able to ask questions in human language, like, where am I most at risk? Like, where is my sensitive data? And then, to me, that's kind of game changing.
Are you seeing that most of the customers that you interact with have some sort of AI plan in place for 2024 moving forward, or is that kind of in the rearview mirror?
I think AI is incredible, and I think it's going to bring a lot. But I do think we need to get the foundation of security as well, right? So whatever model, it doesn't matter if it's like Copilot, LLMs. I actually did one of my graduate degrees in statistics and quantitative analytics, so I'm a huge fan of statistics. But without the right data, you're not going to get the right answers. And so, to me, unfortunately, when I was on Dart, things like cloud misconfigurations, unpatched vulnerabilities. I mean, there's been some of the largest organizations in the world that were brought down because of vulnerabilities that are years old. not having MFA enabled, not having antivirus enabled, like not having the core foundational security tools, I've seen bring large organizations down. So I absolutely believe AI has so much impact, and it's going to reduce our reduce our SOC analysts significantly. I love the ability to do like the PowerPoint presentations. I love the ability to really like interact with human language. But what I'm really most excited about is Rob Lefferts on the Ignite session was going through kind of like the new unified SOC experience. And he came to the second part and he said, the best defense to a breach is not to allow one to happen or something of that nature. But he started going in kind of like the XSPM or the extended security posture management. And it's really going deep into that, like that identify and protect stage. And so for me, that's really where I'm interested on like the new security SOC operations is how can we as a company or like how can I help customers not just, you know, put certain agents on certain devices, but how can I get a clear understanding of my environment? Like if we're talking about like the NIST cybersecurity framework, that identify portfolio, how can I identify where all my resources are? How can I identify where all my vulnerabilities are? How can I identify, where my identities are, where my lateral path movements are? And then go to the next stage is that protect, right? Like if I can actually if I know where everything is and I can actually do time into that protect stage, putting the right mitigations in there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to greatly reduce the amount of successful attacks that my SOC has to look at. And now that I've gotten good data in there, and I've gotten my SOC operations, instead of them having to do, I don't know, just like, 1,000 alerts, they're able to focus maybe more on like 80 alerts, but these are real alerts. And so I'm getting rid of the garbage, and now I'm letting AI really focus on those 80 real alerts.
Yeah, prioritization, and then I mean, you said it earlier, that all depends on your data. So garbage in, garbage out. You got to have the framework in place to make sure that it's quality in, quality out.
100%.
So pulled up another slide here, and it's talking about CSPM. And just for folks that are just listening and not able to see the visuals here, one of the stats is additionally 22% of organizations still assess their cloud security posture manually, which is not only a drain on security resources, but also leaves room for human error in their assessments. And you hit on the fact that I think it was number 3 that you mentioned, where misconfigurations, and I would put that in the category of human error. Is this the stat that you think is kind of in line with what you're seeing, or is this another one that maybe is a little off kilter?
The only reason I would say it is off is because I would think more organizations are still assessing manually. It's still an area that I think a lot of organizations are building the muscle in. And so to see only 1 out of 5 organizations are manually assessing them, if that is true, that gives me a lot more hope for the cloud security world. I would just think it might actually be a little bit higher than that, unfortunately. And the thing is, it's kind of like when you're looking at your cloud environment, you have most organizations have 3 different clouds, AWS, Azure, and GCP. The reports that it's giving you are maybe different than one another. And it's going back to the 10% of remediation. If you have a report and it says you have a server that's exposed to the internet, you're gonna, first thought is I gotta go remediate that, which typically if you're doing it manually, that's a great thing to do. You've got a server 22 or 3389 exposed to the internet. But if I could take more context into it, right? If I have like say I have 2 servers, both are publicly exposed to the internet, both have 3389 and 22 on there, but one's on a VNet that is kind of isolated. One's on a VNet that's peered to my express routes and could allow for lateral movement back to my domain controller because it's a domain join server. I'm going to want to prioritize that. So when you start trying to do it manually, if you're not having these things like if that virtual machine is popped, does it have a managed identity on a storage account, or does it have, is it on the express route, like connected network? Is it contains, secrets to a storage account or to a to a database? So I really like by doing it manually, in my opinion, you're making it harder for you to really get enough context to know which one to remediate at the right time.
No, very thorough, good answer. All right, so again, I'm just going to read it just so people that might be just listening. There are three major challenges here: cost control, security management, and the cloud skills gap. When it comes to security, 35% of IT decision makers report facing challenges around data privacy and data security. 34% report challenges around lack of security, cloud security skills, and expertise. And then finally, 25% report challenges around security cloud resources. Now, you live and breathe this every day, and I think you could probably take this in 1,000 different directions, but is this another one that comes as a shock, or do you think this is something that is kind of accepted in the world of security?
So the one that shocks me is only 25% report challenges around security and cloud resources. I swear it's 100%.
Yeah.
And there is nothing like wrong with that. And if to any of my listeners that you're like only 1 out of 4 people are having these, or 1 out of 4 customers or companies are having these challenges, and you think you're the only one, I guarantee you are not. I truly believe it's 100%, and it's nothing anyone's doing wrong. It goes back to being like the cloud is new, right? So it's not. It's only really been mainstream from an IaaS and a PaaS perspective for maybe 6-7 years. Um, and there's things like I talk to a lot of people, and unfortunately, I would only say a small percentage are like deep into things like Kubernetes security, and understanding how AKS or EKS actually works. I've got a colleague of mine, Abby, who's probably the deepest person in the world in this place. So if I mean, I have challenges in it, and I do this every day, and I've done it every day for like 8 years, and I'm still challenged around it. So the one thing I would say is if you are listening, and please note, I think this is 100% have challenges. Now, there's some really cool tools out there to like, I know not every organization can go to like SANS, but SANS is doing some really cool stuff in cloud security. There's different ones on learning guides on the internet. One of the things, though, I think the cloud brings is it does bring this opportunity. When we say DevSecOps and shift left, that's all incredible. But what I think fundamentally it really requires is us working with the different organizations. And so if your organization's running like AKS, working with the AKS team to understand how are you creating images, what's your development life cycle, like how start looking at ways that we can put security in before it ever gets there. And I do think that would reduce the challenges around securing cloud resources because there'd be more knowledge. And when you can bring in, one of the things I saw most customer companies that are successful do is working with, like, for example, the AKS team and nominating like an AKS security champ. So they're a developer, they're on the like Kubernetes like infra team, but they're a security champ. So that, whether it's them or their peers, they're always advocating, here's things that we can do. Like we can gate vulnerable images, or we could do registry scans before it ever gets into runtime. We can do things like make sure that the images and the instances are like running as as minimal as possible. So working with the actual development teams, and so like the DevOps teams, and building security champs in there, and use it as a two-way relationship. Learn from them like how DevOps works, how CI/CD works. So you'll probably start getting into things like ADO pipelines. There's some really neat things you can do with an ADO pipeline is you can start we talked about infrastructure as code scanning. We can do container image scanning. We can do things like secret scanning or looking to see if your code is susceptible to things like SQL injection. But it will require working with the DevOps team and learning from the DevOps team on their processes. I think I read a study, there's like 900 different DevOps tools out there. So every organization may have a little bit different of a DevOps process. And so don't be shocked if you might be using a tool that not every other organization is, but by working with your DevOps team and learning their process, then we could take that as security folks and figure out ways that we can help them still do their job successfully while also securing the company.
So is that, you're having to work with the DevOps team, learn their tools, learn their process. Is that a cultural shift that you feel falls underneath the umbrella of the CISO and having to kind of reshape or drive that security-minded culture, or is that some of the folks that report to the CISO? And do you think that's what I'm getting at is we've heard time and time again that security is a team sport, but when it comes to cultural shifts, I kind of look to leadership to inject that new type of security first mindset.
I agree. Like it does have to be as a company, we have to put, security has got to be a top priority. I will say, unfortunately, based on a lot of the big things that have happened over the last couple of years, we know certain ransomware groups are just going wild right now. We see a lot of these payments, and we hear that it really freaks a lot of organizations out. And it should, right? I mean, there's been organizations that have lost, I think it's like 4% of their stock price in a single day when they got hit by a ransomware attack. And more than just the company's losses, right? Like I remember sitting in rooms with the CISO and the team and just seeing like most of them like did I miss something? Am I going to lose my job because of this? Like there's a human aspect that we have to always remember about cybersecurity. But one of the neat things is though, because of all of these mainstream publications, I think most organizations are putting cybersecurity a lot further ahead than it was like 8 or 9 years ago. And so having that mindset, one of the other things is a lot of organizations have moved into more of like an agile development world. And like the whole idea of agile is bringing people from different organizations together to be on a scrum team. And one of those, if you could put security in there and they could be part of the scrum team. And so you're using like that same agile mindset, very similar like the DevSecOps aspect.
No, I love it. So we're getting close to coming up on time, and we've got 2 questions left. And Vitaly, I'll let you ask the last question as far as the one that we always ask. But to keep this Microsoft focused, when we look at the slide now, we've got Entra, we've got Purview, and then we've got kind of the pillars in which kind of define Microsoft security. If somebody is starting to grow their business or they're seeing growth going in from 23 to 24, and they're going to have to migrate a bunch of stuff to their cloud of choice, and hopefully that's Azure. What is the first thing from a consulting standpoint that, hey, Drew, we've got this big expansion, or maybe there's an acquisition coming up in the beginning of the new year. We wanted to map out how we move these applications from either on-prem or a different cloud to Azure, so we're set up for growth in 2024. When you start having these conversations about rapid growth and they want to move to the cloud so they can expand and grow with the business, what's the first kind of step of assessment type of evaluations that you would suggest to Acme Corporation?
there are some incredible assessments that can be done on like what you have in your current environment. It basically goes and scans where the applications are. And that's awesome. I would say from a security standpoint, though, the first thing that I always recommend is a landing zone conversation. Most organizations are going to move into like a hub and spoke type model. So you got to have your hub configured properly. But in that landing zone conversation, like really looking at it from not just like network architecture, right? Like where's my peering coming, like what the traffic's going to be doing, but how am I going to do resource groups? How am I going to do subscriptions? How am I going to do management groups? Like how do I actually have who am I going to give permissions to? Am I going to do it by users? Am I going to do it? So really getting a deep dive into, I like to call it subscription management before anything's ever built. And I know that for a lot of organizations, it's hard, but if you have the ability to, before anything's ever built, think about how you're going to deploy. And then once you figure out like that subscription governance model of like how RBAC's going to be done, looking at Azure policy, like I mentioned earlier, like what framework do I want to use? Do I want to use 800.171? Do I want to use CIS? And then figure out what are the things that you do not want to happen. There's like what they're called effect types. So I can do things like deny. Like I will not allow you to put a storage account that's publicly exposed on the internet. Like you can have that deny policy. And there's a really neat little tool called regulatory compliance where I map all of this to the controls. So I can say like, yeah, 171, I can look at it from each control. So I can implement my policies and simultaneously see how it, like when it does get up there, it maps to those controls. So before basically anything ever gets put there, understanding RBAC, understanding policy and frameworks, and really understanding like the network flow that's going to happen. I think they're kind of the big three.
No, that's good.
Yeah, we got one last question we ask all our guests. So you have just become the CISO at your dream organization. What's your first move, deployment, engagement? You have 30 seconds. No, I'm just kidding. You can think about it a little bit. But we've had some interesting answers.
So there's a really good book out there that basically talks about from a leader's perspective, don't make a move for 90 days. Like understand the culture, understand the processes. I can come in and start, like hammering rules down, but there's reasons why these things are the way that they are. And at the end of the day, if I come in, let's say I come into a manufacturing company and implement something and it brings down production and they can't produce whatever it is for 2 or 3 days, I will no longer be the CISO of that organization. And so I would say I would like make sure that it's highlighted before I like get there that I'm not going to make any changes because I want to learn. Like I want to learn the company culture. I want to learn who the different team members are. I want to learn the processes. I want to learn the applications. I want to learn why things are done. I need to understand. But once I start doing things, I've had this internal battle with myself for years, coming from the incident response side and from the architecture side. I love the NIST cybersecurity framework. And I've got some really good CISO friends of mine that I've had this debate with, and everybody sees it differently. There's the identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. I'm pretty simple. I go left to right. That's how I read stuff. So I'm focusing very much on that identify. I want to know where my assets are. I want to know where my vulnerabilities are. I want to know where my accounts are. I want to know where my risk is. And then I'm focusing on the protect. Now, that's hard, right? Because what I'm basically sacrificing is in the detect and respond stage. I can't do that. So I'm going to have people that are maintaining whatever my EDR, whatever my antivirus is there, however they're doing SIM. But where I'm trying to innovate is I really want to focus on getting, because I don't believe I can really, I'm not going to be able to see all my detections unless I have the right resources and assets covered. So it's kind of a catch-22 anyway. If I've got, servers out here on the internet that don't have any agents on it or not having any telemetry coming off back to me, I'm not going to detect it anyway. So I really need to, for me as a new CISO, after I learn the culture, spend the time, learn, I'm really going to focus on that identify and protect stage. And then it's going to be a little bit longer, but I do feel once I get to that detect and respond stage, my data will be a lot cleaner. My SOC teams will be working a lot better. But this is an internal battle. I can actually argue the detect and respond stage first and then go to identify and protect. But yeah.
I don't think there's a wrong answer, because I could see both sides of that coin very easily, for sure.
Yeah. No, it's a great answer.
Well, to button it all up, I will say that, one, thank you for giving us some of your time today. I know your schedule is pretty packed, but to bring it back full circle to where we started this conversation before we actually hit record is when the Longhorns end up playing Alabama for the national championship, we're going to have some kind of bet going since you're Roll Tide and I'm Hook 'em.
You gonna take 2 on that, Greg?
Maybe +3.
I can't say anything because my manager listens to this. He's a Michigan person, so he's assuming that they don't even make it to the next round. So, but we'll see what happens January 1st, and if so, then we'll see what happens. I think it's January 8th.
8th or
yeah.
I'm just waiting for. I'm the Carolina guy. I'm waiting for March, so I don't know what you guys are talking about. Not anything about January.
Well, Drew, thank you again. This was an insightful conversation. If anybody listening has some questions around cloud security or wants to learn more about getting a GBB inside your organization for some insights, please reach out to your account team. We'd be glad to make sure you get connected. But Drew, thank you for some of your time here today.
Appreciate it.
Thank y'all so much.